To pick back up in our new book reading, Pawn in the Game by William Guy Carr. I'll be reading chapter 6, not 6, but chapter 1 and chapter 2, hopefully without any interruptions by the dogs, but I can't promise you on that. They just get excited over chipmunks and they like to bark sometimes. So, all right. Chapter 1. The World Revolutionary Movement, WRM for short. In order to understand the causes in the past which have produced the effects we experience today, especially in regard to the unsatisfactory state of national and international affairs, history must be studied because history does repeat itself. History repeats itself because there has been perfect continuity of purpose in the struggle which has been going on since the beginning of time between the forces of good and evil, to decide whether the rule of God Almighty shall prevail or whether the world shall literally go to the devil. The issue is just as simple as that. It is a fact that both the forces of good and the forces of evil have been divided and split into factions. These factions often oppose each other in an effort to reach a common goal. This makes a study of the subject complicated. These differences in opinion have been produced by propaganda, which is used more often for spreading lies and half-truths than it is used as a medium for telling the plain, unvarnished truth regarding any given event or subject. Warmongers have used propaganda to divide human beings into opposing camps on political, social, economic, and religious issues, so they can stir them up into such a state of emotionalism that they will fight and kill each other. In order to discover the causes which have produced the effects we experience today, all available evidence must be studied carefully. Truths must be separated from falsehoods and fiction from fact. Past events must be studied to see how they have affected and influenced conditions existing today. The human race is divided into two main camps as far as religion is concerned. Those in one camp believe in the existence of God, or of a God. Those in the other camp deny the existence of a supreme being of any kind. This fact is of major importance because it will be proved that all wars and revolutions have been the result of one group or another trying to force their ideologies upon the people of the entire world. The conception of God varies with different sects. Theism teaches that God is a personal being and the author and ruler of the universe. Pantheism defines God with the universe, but not as a personal being. Pantheists believe in the doctrine of the universal presence of the divine spirit in nature. A kind of pantheism has found its way into many religious and philosophical systems. Buddhism and Hinduism both partake of this doctrine. Belief in a personal God includes belief in a celestial world, belief in the soul and spirit in the celestial world after the death of our mortal bodies. People who believe in a personal God must of necessity believe in the existence of Satan, a personal devil. A study of comparative religions proves that, as far as it is possible to probe back, even the members of isolated tribes have always had a religious instinct which caused them to discuss and ponder the questions: why were we born? For what purpose do we live? What ends do we serve? Whither do we go when we die? Even the most backward tribes of Central Africa and Australia seem to have had no doubts regarding the existence of God, a spiritual world, and another existence for their own souls after the death of their mortal bodies. A study of comparative religions also indicate that most, if not all, religions which teach belief in a supreme being started out on a more or less uniformly high level in which the worship and love of Almighty God, respect for our elders and parents, love for our neighbors, i.e. benefactors, and the offering of prayers for deceased relatives and friends form the basic principles. No, not really. I don't pray for the dead. Evil men, actuated by motives of selfishness and greed and the desire for power, cause nearly all religions to deteriorate to the level we find at them today. Some religions deteriorated as far as having priests sacrifice human beings as their offerings to God. Even Christianity, which is one of the most recent religions, deteriorated. Christianity has been split up into many factions, denominations, and it would require a great deal of imagination to picture the vast majority who profess to be Christian today as true soldiers or followers of Jesus Christ. Generally speaking, Christianity has deteriorated in regard to the practice of good works. This becomes a matter of major importance when we study the struggle going on between the forces of good and evil today, because the practice of good works created neighborliness and brought about unity in the Christian fold. The real definition of the word neighbor is a person who has proved himself your benefactor, a person upon whom you can rely, a person who, you are certain, wouldn't do you any harm under any circumstances. That man or woman is your neighbor. I don't have any neighbors. Well, it's all right. The scriptures tell us we must love our neighbor as ourselves for God's sake. The only way to make good neighbors is to perform good works unselfishly. Lack of individual good works means lack of unity and lack of the proper community spirit. Today, we have adopted the cold cliche book type of doing good works. We leave the performance to professional social welfare workers. This has justified the use of the term as cold as professional charity. It is well to remember that even government social security legislation does not relieve the individuals of the duties of neighborliness. Prayer without good works availeth a man nothing. A Christian weakness and disunity lies the atheistic strength. For one reason or another, many Christian denominations are fast losing their hold upon the youth of the so-called free nations. Each person lost to the Christian belief usually turns to secularism and often ends up as a fellow traveler in one or another of the atheistic ideologies of communism or Nazism. The vast majority of professed Christians are not real soldiers of Jesus Christ, whereas every card-bearing member of either the Communist or Nazi parties must swear to give unlimited obedience to the leaders, to devote every waking hour to the furtherance of the cause, and contribute 1/10 of his or her income towards financing the party's activities. While Christians are hopelessly divided into approximately 400 denominations, communists and Nazis are all solidly united as anti-Christians. A continuation of this state of affairs cannot help but enable the leaders of one or another atheistic group winning world domination. When they do so, they will enslave body, soul, and mind. All who refuse to accept their heathen ideology, the Illuminati, will impose the despotism of Satan. There is a great similarity in the beliefs of those who worship a supreme being regarding the origin of man. The majority believe that the Great Father peopled this world for the purpose of giving the less culpable of those who follow Lucifer during the heavenly revolution and another chance to decide of their own free will whether they will accept God's authority and give him unlimited obedience or literally go to the devil. It is such beliefs that sustain such despised sects as Doukhobors and their passive resistance to man-made laws which they consider are contrary to God's divine laws. It is well to remember that the name Lucifer means holder of the light, a very brilliant being, the brightest of the angels. Notwithstanding these special gifts and privileges, he revolted against the supremacy of Almighty God. Most people other than atheists and Darwinists accept the story of the creation. There are, however, a great many different opinions regarding the story of Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden. Many students of comparative religion argue that it is likely God created many worlds and many Adams and Eves, placing them in locations where they could produce their kind and populate the planets upon which they lived. The fact that human beings are placed on this earth by a method and process of birth, which prevents them having any knowledge of a previous existence, fits in with this theory. All we know regarding the period before creation is what has been revealed to us as told in the Holy Scriptures. It really doesn't matter a great deal if there was one or many Adams and Eves. The important thing to remember is the fact that all human beings have been given a free will and must decide for themselves whether they believe in a God and a devil, or if they believe in the atheistic materialistic ideology. Each and every human being must make up his or her mind one way or the other. If a person believes there is a God and a devil, then that person must decide which he is going to serve. An atheist, if he joins either of the totalitarian ideologies, serves the party and the state. He must give unlimited obedience to the head of the party and the state. The penalty for diversion is suffering, imprisonment, and possible death. Belief in the existence of God automatically includes belief in supernaturally good and evil spirits, which can influence men's minds for good or evil purposes. It is the struggle going on for the possession of men's souls that causes the conditions which prevail upon this earth today. The power of the devil has dramatically emphasized when he tempted Christ himself while he was in the desert preparing himself for his ministry. Atheists, on the other hand, do not believe in the existence of supernatural beings. They argue that God has never proved to exist. There are many groups of atheists: true communists, Grand Orient Masons, free thinkers, members of the League of the Godless, Illuminatists, nihilists, anarchists, true Nazi, and the Mafia. Mafia, really? Many godless people subscribe to various forms of secularism, even if they fight shy of becoming active in the atheistic, communist, and Nazi groups. Most atheists base their belief on the principle that there is only one reality, matter, that the blind forces of matter, sometimes referred to as energy, evolve into vegetables, animal, and man. Well, that's crazy. They deny the existence of a soul and the possibility of life in another world after the death of our mortal bodies. Evidence will be produced to prove that modern communism was organized in the year 1773 by a group of international money barons who have used it since as their manual of action to further their secret plans to bring about a totalitarian godless state. Lenin made this clear in his book, Left-Wing Communism. On page 53, he said, "Our theory, communism, is not a dogma, settled doctrine. It is a manual of action." Many modern leaders have said and done the same things as Lucifer did during the heavenly revolution. There is no appreciable difference between red and black atheism. The only difference is in the plans used by the opposing leaders to ultimately to win. Let me say that again. The only difference is in the plans used by the opposing leaders to ultimately win undisputed control of the world's resources and bring into their ideas for a totalitarian, godless dictatorship. Let me take a drink. Okay, sorry. Karl Ritter, 1779 to 1859, was a German professor of history and geopolitical science. He wrote the antitheses to Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto. He also drew up a plan by which he maintained the Aryan race could first dominate Europe and then the entire world. Certain atheistic leaders of the Aryan group adopted Karl Ritter's plan. They organized Nazism to further their secret ambitions to obtain ultimate control of the world and turn it into a godless state under their conception of totalitarian dictatorship. This small group of men knew they must either join up with or destroy the power and influence of the international bankers. It is doubtful if more than a mere handful of the top level leaders of the communist and fascist movements know their organizations are being used to further the secret ambitions of the Illuminati, which are the high priests of Satanism. According to the leaders both of atheistic groups, the state must be supreme. This being so, the head of the state is God on earth. This belief brings into an actual practice the deification of man. Much more is generally known about Karl Marx and communism than about Karl Ritter and Nazism. Ritter was for many years professor of history at Frankfurt University, Germany. Afterwards, he taught geography at the Berlin University. In educational circles, he was considered one of the greatest authorities on history, geography, and geopolitical science. Because the aims and objects of the leaders of the Aryan Party have always been kept secret, Karl Ritter's connection with the leaders in Nazism is very little known. Intelligent officers connected with the British government unearthed his connection with the Aryan war lords when studying political economy. I can't say that word right now, forgive me. Economy, yes, political economy, geopolitical science, and comparative religions in German universities. This information was passed on to the proper authorities, but as so often happens, political leaders and diplomats either fail to realize the significance of what they were told or wished to ignore it. Karl Ritter's study of history convinced him that a very small group of wealthy and influential international bankers who gave allegiance to no country but meddled in the affairs of all, had in 1773 organized Grand Orient Freemasonry for the purpose of using the world revolutionary movement to further their secret ambitions. Their long-range plan was for their group to gain ultimate control of the wealth, natural resources, and manpower of the entire world. Their ultimate objective was to form a totalitarian dictatorship based on their theories of atheistic dialectical and historical materialism. Ritter claimed that most of, if not all, the international bankers were of Jewish descent, regardless of whether or not they practiced the Jewish faith. In his antithesis to Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, he dealt with the danger to be faced if these group of men were allowed to continue to control and direct the policies of international communism. He offered the German Aryan warlords very concrete and practical suggestions for defeating the conspiracy of the international money barons. Professor Ritter gave the Aryan warlords an alternative long-range plan by which they could gain ultimate control of the world's resources for the Aryan races. To offset the plans of the international money barons, Karl Ritter advised the leaders of the Aryan groups to organize Nazism and use fascism, i.e. National Socialism, as their manual of action to further their secret ambitions for world conquest. Professor Ritter also pointed out that because the international bankers intended to use all phases of Semitism to further their plans, the Aryan leaders should use all phases of anti-Semitism to further their cause. Karl Ritter's long-range plan for ultimate world conquest include the following suggestions. 1. The subjugation of all European countries by Germany. To achieve this end, he suggested the German military junkers, that's what it says, junkers, be encouraged and assisted to obtain control of the government so they could engage in a series of military adventures, interspersed with economic wars. The objective being to weaken the economy and manpower of the European nations to be subjugated. Karl Ritter said that it was not absolutely essential to the success of long-range plan that each military adventure end in a clear-cut victory, provided the other nations involved were left in such a weakened condition that their recovery economically and in strength of manpower took longer than that of Germany. Carl Ritter stressed the importance of convincing the German people that they were physically and mentally superior to the Semitic races. From this thought, Aryan propagandists developed the idea of the German master race. They did this to counter the propaganda of the international bankers, which claim the Semitic race is to be God's chosen people and divinely chosen to inherit the earth. The Aryan leaders promulgated the doctrine that their race was the master race on this earth. Thus, millions of people were divided into opposing camps. Number 2. Carl Ritter recommended a financial policy which would prevent the international bankers obtaining control of the economy of Germany and her satellite states, as they had obtained economic control in England, France, and America. 3. He recommended the organization of a Nazi fifth column to counteract the communist underground organization. Its objective was to persuade the upper and middle classes of the countries they planned to subjugate to accept fascism as the only antidote to communism. German fifth columnists were to condition people in their countries to welcome the German armies as their military protectors against threatened communist aggression. Carl Ritter warned the leaders of the Aryan group that a military invasion of another country should never be undertaken until the fifth column and propaganda machines had thoroughly paved the way and convinced the majority of the people to accept their armed intervention as the act of saviors or crusaders and not as aggressors. Number 4. Carl Ritter cold-bloodedly recommended the total destruction of communism and the extermination of the Jewish race as essential to obtaining ultimate control of international affairs by the Aryan leaders. He justified this drastic stipulation on the facts of history, which he claimed proved communism was being used by the international Jewish bankers to further their own selfish materialistic ambitions. There are many more items making up the overall long-range plan, but in this chapter it is sufficient to produce enough evidence to unlock the door behind which the secret plans of two small groups of totalitarian-minded, atheistic, materialistic men were hidden. The study of comparative religions, geopolitical science, and political economy, and years of intensive research revealed the truth that many millions of human beings have been used as pawns in the game by the leaders of the two atheistic, totalitarian-minded groups, who will continue playing their hideous games of international chess until one or the other is eliminated. Evidence will be produced to show how this game has been conducted in the past and what moves are likely to be made in the near future to enable one group to win the game. The followers of all religions that teach the existence of God and life in and hereafter believe in the love and worship of God and charity towards all men of goodwill. Sincere believers will suffer any hardship and make any sacrifice in order to ensure their eternal salvation. The followers of atheism are taught to hate all who refuse to accept their materialistic creed. The determination of the leaders of both atheist groups to achieve the world domination permits them to conceive the most diabolical conspiracies and perpetuate all kinds of crimes, from individuals' assassinations to genocide. They foment wars in order to weaken nations they still have to subjugate. The study of comparative religion shows also that communism and Nazism are utterly incompatible with all religions that believe in the existence of an almighty God. Experience and history proves that those who believe in God and those who deny his existence are in such contradiction that neither can survive the triumph of the other. Atheistic leaders in subjugated countries may, for a time, tolerate religions which teach belief in God, but they only allow the priests to function on a social periphery. They take good care that the priests do not have the opportunity to influence the social and political behavior of their congregations. Evidence proves that the ultimate object of both major atheistic ideologies is to obliterate from the minds of mankind by persecution and systematically applied program of continuous brainwashing all knowledge of a supreme being, the existence of a soul, and the hope of life in a hereafter. These being facts, any talk of coexistence is either utter nonsense or propaganda. The trouble today is the continuation of the heavenly revolution. If God has placed human beings on this earth so that they may know Him, love Him, and serve Him in this life in order to be happy with Him forever in the next world, then it is illogical to reason that the only way in which Lucifer could hope to win back the souls in dispute would be to inoculate them with the doctrine of atheistic materialism. Undoubtedly, many people will ask, but how could the devil inoculate the minds of men with atheistic and other evil ideas? That question can be answered in this way. If human beings call established radio and television stations, I think he meant recall. I'm not sure. Let me reread that. That question can be answered in this way. If human beings call established radio and television stations from which one individual can influence millions of others by broadcasting his opinions on any given subject over the invisible airwaves, then why shouldn't it be possible for celestial beings to broadcast their messages to us? No brain specialist has dared to deny that in the brain of each individual there is some kind of mysterious receiving set. Every hour of every day, human beings are saying, I was inspired to do this, or I was tempted to do that. Thoughts, be they good or bad, must originate somewhere, from some cause, and be transmitted to the human brain. The body is only the instrument which puts the dominating thought for good or for evil into effect. One fundamental fact which all people who believe in the existence of God must never forget is this. If we are on this earth for a period of trial, if we have been given our free will, it is to enable us to decide whether we want to go to God or want to go to the devil. Therefore, if the devil did not have the opportunity to influence the minds of men, there would be no test. If Almighty God sent His prophets and His Son, Jesus Christ, to show us clearly what is good and what is evil, then why wouldn't the devil send his false Christ and his false prophets to try and prove to us that evil is good and that good is evil? The simplest way to understand what is going on in the world today is to study the events of history as the moves being made in a continuing game of international chess. The leaders of the Illuminati have divided the people of the world into two main camps. They use kings and queens, bishop and knights, and the masses of the world's population as pieces in their games. The ruthless policy of the leaders is to consider all human beings as expendable, providing the sacrifice of a major piece or a million pawns place them a move nearer than their ultimate totalitarian goal, the despotism of Satan. Professor Ritter is reported to have said the present phase of this game started in the counting house of Amschel Meyer Bauer, alias Rothschild, located at Frankfurt on the Main in Germany, with 13 gold and silver smiths decided they must remove all the crowned heads of Europe, destroying all existing governments and eliminate all organized religions before they were secure absolute control of the wealth, natural resources, and manpower of the entire world, and establish a satanic despotism. Dialectical and historical materialism was to be used to further these plans. Strange though it may seem, history will prove that leaders of both the Semitic and anti-Semitic groups have on occasion joined forces to fight against the common enemy, such as the British Empire or the Christian religion. And while the masses fought, the Illuminati, who constitute the secret power behind the world revolutionary movements, jockeyed for the best position from which they would derive the greatest future benefit. The leaders of both communism and Nazism have crossed and double-crossed each other, but it is doubtful if many of the leaders realized before it was too late that even they were only tools controlled by the agentur of the Illuminati, who use all that is evil to further their ends. When the secret powers heading either group even suspect one of their tools know too much, they ordered him liquidated. Evidence will be produced to prove that the leaders of these two groups of totalitarian-minded men have instigated many individual assassinations and caused many revolutions and wars in which tens of millions of human beings have been killed, while millions have been wounded and rendered homeless. It is difficult to discover a military leader who can justify the decision to drop atomic bombs on Hiroshima or Nagasaki, where, in the twinkling of an eye, approximately 100,000 people were killed and twice the number seriously injured. The Japanese military forces had already been defeated. Surrender was only a matter of hours or days away when this diabolical act was perpetuated. The only logical conclusion is that the secret powers who, it will be proved, influence and control the policies of most of the national governments decided that this most modern of all lethal weapons had to be demonstrated to remind Stalin what would happen if he became too obnoxious. This is the only excuse which provides even the resemblance of justification for such an outrage against humanity. But the atomic bomb and the hydrogen bomb are no longer the world's most lethal weapons. Nerve gas, now being stockpiled by both communist and non-communist nations, is capable of wiping out all living creatures in a country, city, or town. The extent of destruction of all human life in a nation can be adjusted to the military and economic requirements of those who decide to use nerve gas to reach their goal. Nerve gas is said to be highly concentrated fluorine in its gaseous form. I did not know that. It is the most penetrating and deadly gas ever discovered by man. It is colorless, odorless, tasteless, and economical to produce. One single drop, even when heavily diluted with water or oil, will, if it comes in contact with a living body, causes paralysis of the breathing apparatus and death. In a few minutes, it will penetrate even through rubber clothing, such as is worn by firemen when on duty. Nerve gas will not seriously damage inanimate objects. Within a few days after the nerve gas has been applied, it would be safe for the invading force to enter the contaminated areas again. They would be areas of the dead, but all buildings and machinery would be intact. The only known antidote to nerve gas is the drug atropine. To be effective, it must be injected into the veins of the victims immediately and repeated after they have been contaminated. This means the defense is not practical for densely populated areas. Both communist and anti-communist governments have nerve gas. The knowledge that both sides have this gas in quantity may cause both sides to hesitate to use it. But it is well known fact that desperate and ruthless men will resort to any extremes to gain their objectives. And as will be proved, they have never hesitated to sacrifice millions upon millions of human beings, men, women, and children, if by doing so they advance themselves only one step nearer to the ultimate goal. We may well ask the question, how is the struggle now going on upon this earth going to end? It is doubtful there is a single living being who hasn't asked this question. It is a question young married couples anxiously ask each other when they debate if they should allow their conjugal bliss to bring more children into this hate-dominated world. The most complete answer is to be found in the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 24, verse 15 through 34. At that time, Jesus said to his disciples, "When you shall see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, he that readeth, let him understand. Then they that are in Judea, let them flee to the mountains. And he that is on the housetop, let him not come down to take anything out of his house. And he that is in the field, let him not go back to get his coat. And woe to them that are with child, and give suck in those days. But pray that your flight be not in winter or on the Sabbath. For there shall be great tribulation, such as hath not been from the beginning of the world until now, neither shall be. And unless those days shall be shortened, no flesh shall be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days shall be shortened." Christ then proceeded to deal with the problem of the false leaders and the Antichrist, who he foretold would use propaganda to befuddle men's thinking. He said, "Then if any man shall say to you, Lo, here is Christ, or there, do not believe him. For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, who shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch as to deceive, if possible, even the elect. Behold, I have told it to you beforehand. If therefore they shall say to you, Behold, he is in the desert, go ye not out. Behold, he is in the closet, believe it not. For as lightning cometh out of the east, and peereth even unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Wheresoever the body shall be, there shall the eagles be gathered together. And immediately after the tribulations of those days, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall be moved, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with much power and majesty. And he shall send his angels with a trumpet and a great sound, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from the farthest part of heaven to the utmost bounds of them. And from the fig tree learn this parable. When the branch thereof is now tender, and the leaves come forth, you know that summer is nigh. So you also, when you shall see these things, know ye that it is nigh, even at the door. Amen. I say to you that this generation shall not pass till all these things shall be done. The branch is indeed now tender. Many leaves have budded. We need only one more war in which both sides use atomic or hydrogen bombs and nerve gas, and we shall have inflicted upon ourselves the abominations of desolation, which shall reduce the human race to such chaotic conditions that divine intervention will be our only salvation. Today it is common practice for people, especially those who act willfully and unwillfully as the agents of the evil powers, to blame God for the sorry mess in which we find ourselves. The intelligent people will admit that God cannot be blamed. He gave us our free will. He gave us the commandments as our guide. He gave us Christ as a teacher and living example. We obstinately refuse to accept the teachings and example of Christ. If we also refuse to obey the commandments of God, how can we reasonably blame any agency other than ourselves for allowing the forces of evil to gain supremacy in this world of ours? Edmund Burke once wrote, "All that is necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing." He wrote a great truth. Yeah, that's pretty good. The study of comparative religions in relation to the conditions we are experiencing in the world today brings the unbiased student to the conclusion that those beings who worship God and believe in another life after the death of our mortal bodies enjoy a religion of love and hope. Atheism is a religion of hate and blackest despair. And yet, never before the history of the world has such a determined effort been brought forth to introduce secularism, why can't I say that word? Secularism into our lives as since 1846, when C.J. Holyoake, C. Bradlaugh, and others inserted their opinion that human interests should be limited to concerns of the present life. These advocates of secularism were the predecessors of the most recent flock of false Christs and false prophets: Karl Marx, Karl Ritter, Lenin, Stalin, Hitler, and Mussolini. These men did deceive millions upon millions of people by working great signs and wonders. They deceived many professing Christians who should have known better. Wow, you guys. I'm getting a history lesson. How long has it been? What does it say? Has it been? I can't read that. Does it say 36? Well, I think I can continue. So chapter 2. The English Revolution, 1640 to 1616. The forces of evil realized that in order to win undisputed control of the material assets of the world and establish an atheistic, materialistic, totalitarian dictatorship, it is necessary to destroy all forms of constitutional government and organized religion. In order to do this, the forces of evil decided they must divide the peoples of the world against each other on various issues. Dating back into antiquity, the Aryan and Semitic races were driven into enmity against each other to serve the secret ambitions of their atheistic, materialistic leaders. Had the people of the Aryan and Semitic races remained steadfast to their belief in God and faithful to his commandments, the forces of evil could never have accomplished their evil purpose. The term Aryan actually denotes the lingual groups, otherwise known as Indo-European or Indo-Germanic. It comprises two groups. The Western or European and the Eastern or Armenian. The Aryan languages show a common origin by their vocabulary system and inflections. Actually, the word Aryan means an honorable lord of the soil. Thus, it is that most leaders of the Aryan group in Europe were landed barons who maintained strong armed forces to protect their properties. From among these barons came the Aryan warlords. They in turn organized Nazism and used fascism and all anti-Semitic groups' rights of center to serve their purpose and further their secret plans for world domination. The chief divisions of the Aryan groups are the Teutonic, the Romanic, and the Slavic races who settled in Western Europe. The Turks, the Magyars, the Basques, and the Finns are non-Aryan races. The common ancestors of the Aryan groups dwelt among the Pamirs at a period of remote antiquity. On the other hand, the Semitic groups are actually divided into two sections. One includes the Assyrian, the Armenian, the Hebrew, and the Phoenician groups. The other section includes the Arabic and Ethiopian groups. The Arabic is the most copious group, the Armenian the poorest. The Hebrews occupy an intermediary position. Today, the term Jew is used very loosely to define people who at one time or another embraced the Jewish faith. Many of these are not actually Semitic in racial origin. A great number of people who accepted the Jewish faith are descendants of the Herodians, who were Ottomans of Turkish Mongol blood. They are actually Edomites. Isn't that something? The important fact to remember is that among the Jewish leaders, in exactly the same way as among the Aryan leaders, there always has been a small, hard core of men who have been and still are Illuminist or atheist. They may have given lip service to the Jewish or Christian religions to suit their own purpose, but they never believed in the existence of God. They are internationalists now. They give allegiance to no particular nation, although they have used, on occasion, nationalism to further their cause. Their only concern is to gain greater economic and political power. The ultimate objective of the leaders of both groups is identical. They are determined to win for themselves undisputed control of the wealth, natural resources, and manpower of the entire world. They intend to turn the world into their conception of a totalitarian, godless dictatorship. The non-Semitic and Turk-Finnish races infiltrated into Europe from Asia about the 1st century after the advent of Christ. They took the land route north of the Caspian Sea. These peoples are referred to in history as Khazars. They were a pagan people. They settled in the Eastern Europe and established a powerful Khazar kingdom. They expanded their dominions by military quests until, by the end of the 8th century, they occupied the greater portion of the Eastern Europe west of the Ural Mountains and north of the Black Sea. The Khazars ultimately accepted Judaism as their religion in preference to Christianity or Mohammedanism. Synagogues and schools for teaching Judaism were built throughout their kingdom. At the peak of their power, the Khazars were collecting tribute from about 25 conquered peoples. The great Khazar kingdom flourished for almost 500 years. Then, towards the end of the 10th century, the Khazars were defeated in battle by the Varangians, Russians, who swept down upon them from the north. The conquest of the Khazars was completed by the end of the 13th century. The revolutionary movement, inspired by the Khazar Jews, went on within the Russian Empire from the 13th century until the Red October Revolution of 1917. The conquest of the Khazars in the 13th century explains how so many people, now commonly referred to as Jews, remained within the Russian Empire. There is one other important fact that sheds light on the subject of Aryanism and Semitism. The Finns. and other groups, generally classified as Varganians, Russians, were of non-Aryan origin, and the German people, generally speaking, have treated them as enemies. One act of Christ has a great deal of importance in the study of the world revolutionary movement. Christ was considered by many a radical who based his reform movement on the worship of Almighty God, obedience to constituted authority, and love of one's neighbors. The story and the life of Christ shows that he loved all people except one particular group. He hated the moneylenders with an intensity that seemed strange in a man of so mild a character. Jesus repeatedly admonished the moneylenders for their practice of usury. He publicly denounced them as worshippers of mammon. He said they were of the synagogue of Satan, Revelation 2:9. He emphatically expressed his extreme hatred of the moneylenders when he took a whip and drove them out of the temple. He admonished them in these words: "This temple was built as the house of God, but you have turned it into a den of thieves." By performing this act of vengeance on the moneylenders, Christ signed his own death warrant. It was the Illuminati and the false priests and elders in their pay who hatched the plot by which Christ would be executed by the Roman soldiers. It was they who supplied the 30 pieces of silver used to bribe Judas. It was they who used their propagandists to misinform and mislead the mob. Yes, he was a naval officer. It was the agents of the Illuminati who led the mob when they accepted Barabbas and screamed that Christ be crucified. It was the Illuminati who arranged matters so that the Roman soldiers acted as their executioners. Then, after the foul deed had been done and they had their revenge, the conspirators stepped into the background and let their guilt rest on the masses of the Jews and their children. History proves that they had a fiendish reason for putting the guilt for the death of Christ on the Jewish people. History proves that they intended to use the hate engendered amongst the Jewish people as the result of persecution to serve their vile purposes and further their secret totalitarian ambitions. Christ knew all these things. He made his knowledge known in the most dramatic manner possible. As he hung, dying on the cross, he prayed to his heavenly Father and said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Surely he was praying for the mob. He was asking forgiveness for the men who had been used by the Illuminati to be the instrument of their vengeance. History proves the international moneylenders have been using the mob to further their secret ambitions ever since. In the Lenin Institute in Moscow, the professors who lectured to aspiring revolutionary leaders from all over the world invariably referred to the masses as the mob. The Illuminati direct all evil forces. Study of the World Revolutionary Movement, WRM, from the time of Christ to the present day proves that it is unjust to blame the whole Jewish race for the crimes committed against humanity by a small group of false priests and moneylenders. These men always have been and still are the secret power behind internationalism. They use communism today as their manual of action to further their secret plans for ultimate world domination. Study of history will prove that it is equally unjust to blame the whole German and Italian people for the crimes against humanity committed by the small group of Aryan warlords who organized Nazism, in the hope that they could defeat international communism and political Zionism and give them world domination by military conquest. History proves clearly that the leaders of the two opposing groups have divided the masses of the people, regardless of race, color, or creed, into two opposing camps, and then used all as pawns in the game of international chess. They played to decide which group will ultimately defeat the other and establish once and for all undisputed control over the world, its wealth, its natural resources, its manpower, and its religion. It must be remembered that as the purpose of the devil is to win men's souls away from God, Satan uses both red communism and black Nazism to influence the minds of men so that they will embrace either atheistic ideology. Those who accept either atheistic ideology sell their souls to the devil. Historical events prove the continuity of the evil purpose of the Illuminati. Many theologians agree that this perfect continuity of their long-range plans is positive evidence that they are, as Christ named them, of the synagogue of Satan. Theologians base their opinion on the theory that nothing human could have such a continuing record of evil down through the ages of time. The continuity of evil is the exact opposite. Okay. Oh, I got to stop there for a minute. I almost choked. You'll see why here in a minute. Okay. The continuity of evil is the exact opposite of the apostolic succession of the Roman Catholic Church. No, but we'll keep it there. In this, as in many other things, we are forcibly reminded of the actual power of the supernatural forces to influence our individual lives, national policy, and international affairs. Arguments of this kind regarding an evil-minded Jew are equally applicable to evil-minded Aryans and evil-minded men of all races, creeds, and colors. History proves that Seneca, 4 BC to 65 AD, died because he, like Christ, tried to expose the corrupt practices and evil influences of the money lenders who had infiltrated into the Roman Empire. Seneca was a famous Roman philosopher. He was chosen tutor to Nero, who became emperor of Rome. For a long time, Seneca was Nero's best friend and most trusted advisor. Nero married Poppaea? I'm not sure what her name is, who brought him under the evil influence of the money lenders. Nero became one of the most infamous rulers the world has ever known. His licentious conduct and depraved habits developed in him a character so base that he lived only to persecute and destroy everything that was good. His acts of revenge took the form of atrocities usually committed in public upon the victims of his wrath. Seneca lost his influence over Nero, but he never stopped publicly denouncing the moneylenders for their evil influence and corrupt practices. Finally, the moneylenders demanded that Nero take action against Seneca, who was very popular with the people. So as not to arouse the wrath of the people against himself, the moneylenders, Nero ordered Seneca to end his own life. What? I command you to kill yourself? Is that what they're saying? That's stupid. That's just stupid. Okay, this is the first recorded case in which the money lenders made a person commit suicide. That's exactly what it said, because he had become troublesome to them. But it was by no means the last. History records dozens of similar suicides and murders. Are you serious? Which were made to appear as accidents or suicides. One of the most notorious in recent years was that of James F. Forrestal. In 1945, Forrestal had been convinced that the American bankers were closely affiliated with the international bankers who controlled the banks of England, France, and other countries. What was that, Joseph? Unfortunately, William only knew part of the conspiracy. Right. You're right. You're absolutely right. So I'm not going to quit reading this book. I'm going to keep reading it. Absolutely. Yeah, he didn't realize that the Roman Catholic Church was completely involved. Well, probably the puppet master of these puppets, but, we'll see. Okay. He was also convinced, according to his diaries, that the international money barons were the Illuminati and directly responsible for the outbreak of World Wars I and II. He tried to convince President Roosevelt and the other top-level government officials of the truth. Either he failed and committed suicide in a fit of depression, or he was murdered to shut his mouth forever. Murder, made to appear like suicide, has been accepted policy in the top levels of international intrigue for many centuries. Justinian I, Flavius Anacus Justinianus, 483 to 565 AD, wrote his famous book of the law, Corpus Juris Civilis. He tried to put an end to the illegal methods of traffic and trade indulged in by certain Jewish merchants. In engaging in illegal trade and wholesome smuggling, the Jewish merchants, who were only agents of the Illuminati, obtained unfair advantage over their Gentile competitors. They put them out of business. The book of law, written by Justinian, was accepted as the textbook of law right down to the 10th century. Even today, it is considered the most important of all documents of jurisprudence. But the moneylenders were able to offset the good Justinian tried to do. Funk and Wagnall's Jewish Encyclopedia has this to say about the Jews in those days. They enjoyed full religious liberty. Minor offices were open to them. The trade in slaves constituted the main source of livelihood for the Roman Jews, and decrees against this traffic were used in 335, 336, 339, 384 AD, etc. My mom and dad had Funk and Wagnall's Jewish encyclopedias. I wish I knew where they were at. This is the story in black and white. But history reveals that Jewish merchants and moneylenders did not confine their illegal activities to the slave trade. It is recorded that they engaged in every form of illegal traffic, including the drug trade, prostitution, wholesale smuggling of liquors, perfumes, jewels, and their dutiable goods. We got to remember now, because back, in the last chapter, he said that these Jews were comprised, remember, Edomites. They were Jews. They converted to the religion even though they didn't believe in the religion. It was just all for, show, basically. So let's just remember that. He is not talking about the true Hebrews, I guess you want to call them, Israelites from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's not what he's really talking about. Sure, there's some of them, I'm sure, thrown in there. Absolutely no problem at all. I'm sure that there is. But it's for primarily people such as the Bowers who turned themselves into the Rothschilds. They said that they're Jews, but they're really not Jews. I believe they say that they are either Ashkenazi or the Khazars or whatever, which were not really Jews. So we got to remember that. Keep that in the back of your mind at all times while reading this. Okay, I'm so sorry. I just wanted to make sure that you understood that. In order to protect their illegal trade and traffic, they bribed and corrupted officials by use of drugs and liquors and women. They destroyed the morals of the people. History records that Justinian, although emperor of the Roman Empire, wasn't strong enough to put a stop to their activities. Edward Gibbon, 1737 to 1794, deals with the corrupting influence of the Jewish merchants and moneylenders. He credits them with contributing greatly to the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. And that book is a huge book. It's huge. He wrote the book with that title. Gibbon gives considerable space to the part Poppaea, Nero's wife, played in bringing about the conditions which started the people of Rome reeling drunkenly towards their own destruction. With the fall of the Roman Empire, Jewish predominance was established. The nations of Europe entered into what historians name the Dark Ages. The Encyclopedia Britannica has this to say on this subject. There was an inevitable tendency for them, the Jewish merchants and moneylenders, to specialize in commerce for which their acumen and ubiquity gave them special qualifications. In the Dark Ages, the commerce of Western Europe was largely in their hands, in particular the slave trade. Jewish control of trade and commerce, both legal and illegal, grew tighter and tighter. It spread far and wide until every European country's economy was more or less in their hands. Evidence in the form of Polish and Hungarian coins bearing Jewish inscriptions gives some indication of the power they exerted in financial matters during those days. The fact that the Jews made a special effort to issue and control currency supports the opinion that the moneylenders had adopted the slogan, "Let us issue and control the money of a nation, and we care not who makes its laws," long before Amschel Mayer Bauer, 1743 to 1812, used the slogan to explain to his co-conspirators the reason the Jewish moneylenders had obtained control of the Bank of England in 1694. The barons, who were the leaders of Arianism, determined they would break the Jewish control of trade, commerce, and money in Europe. It was with this purpose in mind that in 1095 they obtained the support of certain Christian rulers to start the Crusades or Holy Wars. Between 1095 and 1271, 8 crusades were organized. Officially, the Crusades were military expeditions undertaken to ensure the safety of pilgrims who wished to visit the Holy Sepulchre and set up Christian rule in Palestine. In actual fact, they were wars fomented for the purpose of dividing the population of Europe into 2 camps. One camp pro-Jewish and the other anti-Jewish. In more recent years, the secret powers divided the white race into Semitic and anti-Semitic groups. Some of the Crusades were successful, some were not. The net result was that in 1271, Palestine still remained in the hands of the infidels, although the countries of Christendom had spent millions in money and treasure to finance the Crusades and sacrifice millions of human lives fighting those holy wars. Am I reading this right? Strange to relate, the Jewish moneylenders grew richer and stronger than ever. There is one phase of the Crusades which must not be overlooked when the causes are being studied in relation to the effects they produced in later years. In 1215, the Roman Catholic hierarchy held the Fourth Lateran Council. The main topic under consideration was Jewish aggression in all the countries of Europe, which we just read that book. During this period of history, the rulers of the church and the rulers of the state worked in unity. The rulers of the church, after due deliberation, expressed themselves in favor of continuing the Crusades. They also drew up and passed decrees designed to put an end to usury and the Jewish moneylenders' practice of using unethical methods in traffic and trade to obtain unfavored advantage over Gentile competitors and to curb corrupt and immoral practices. To achieve this purpose, the dignitaries attending the Fourth Lateran Council decreed that in the future the Jews be restricted to living in their own quarters. Jews were absolutely prohibited from hiring Christians as their employees. This decree was passed because Jewish moneylenders and merchants operated on the joint stock company principle. They employed Christians to act as their frontmen while they hid in the background directing operations. This was convenient because when anything went wrong, the Christian frontmen got the blame. And that's just like the Jezebel thing, really. I mean, yeah, she dealt behind the throne there. So if anything went wrong, it was Ahab that got the problem, that got the trouble. But she ruled the strings in the back. How crazy is this? Is this even real? This is crazy. Okay. I'm sorry, I just totally missed my spot here, so let me see. They employed Christians to act as their front men while they hid in the background directing operations. This was convenient because when anything went wrong, the Christian front men got the blame and the punishment while they got off scot-free. In addition, by the decrees, Jews were absolutely prohibited from employing Christian females in their homes and establishment. Yeah, exactly. I agree with you, Joseph. This is all insane. This really is crazy stuff. I mean, this is enough to make me want to sit here and cry after I get done reading because this is messed up stuff. This was convenient because when anything went wrong, the Christian frontmen got the blame and the punishment while they got off scot-free. In addition, by the decrees, Jews were absolutely prohibited from employing Christian females in their homes and establishments. This decree was passed because evidence was produced to prove that young females were systematically seduced and then turned into prostitutes. Their masters used them to obtain control over influential officials. But that's kind of like what the priests and the Jesuits did with the confessional booth, you know? I mean, What? Other decrees made it unlawful for Jews to engage in any commercial activities. But even the power of the church, supported by most Christian officials of the state, could not make the money barons amenable to the law. All the decrees accomplished was to intensify the hatred the Illuminati had for the Church of Christ, and they started a continuing campaign to separate the church from the state. To achieve this purpose, they introduced the idea of secularism amongst the laity. In 1253, the French government ordered the Jews expelled because they refused to obey the law. Most of the Jews who were expelled went over to England. In 1255, the Jewish moneylenders had obtained absolute control of many church dignitaries and most of the nobility. That the moneylenders, the rabbis, and elders belonged to the Illuminati was proved by evidence given during the investigation ordered by King Henry III into the ritual slaying of St. Hugh of Lincoln in 1255. 18 Jews were proved to have been the culprits. They were tried, found guilty, and executed. In 1272, King Henry died. Edward I became King of England. He determined the Jewish leaders must give up the practice of usury. In 1275, he had Parliament pass the Statutes of Jewry. They were designed to curb the power Jewish usurers were exerting over their debtors, both Christians and fellow Jews. The Statutes of Jewry were probably the first legislation in which the Commons and Parliament had an active part. They could not be classified as anti-Semitic because they actually protected the interests of honest and law-abiding Jews. But, as had happened so often before, the Jewish moneylenders thought that the power they could exert over both the church and the state would prevent them to defy the king's decree in the same way as they had set at naught those passed by the Lateran Council. They made a grave mistake. In 1290, King Edward issued another decree. All Jews were expelled from England. This was the start of what historians call the Great Eviction. After Edward I started the ball rolling, all the crowned heads of Europe followed his example. In 1306, France expelled the Jews. In 1348, Saxony followed suit. In 1360, Hungary. In 1370, Belgium. In 1380, Slovakia. In 1420, Austria. In 1444, the Netherlands. And in 1492, Spain. The expulsion of the Jews from Spain has special significance. It throws light on the Spanish Inquisition. Most people have the idea the Inquisition was instituted by Roman Catholics to persecute Protestants who had broken away from the church. Oh, and they're going to say, no, it's not. As a matter of fact, the Inquisition, as introduced by Pope Innocent III, was a means of unmasking heretics and infidels who were masquerading as Christians for the purpose of destroying the Christian religion from within. It didn't make the slightest difference to the inquisitors whether the accused was Jew or Gentile, black or white. The terrible ceremony of the auto de fe, or act of faith, was specially designed to be used in connection with the execution of all convicted heretics and infidels when Torquemada, 1420 to 1498, was Grand Inquisitor. It is these hidden incidents that reveal so much truth. It was in Spain during the 14th century the Jewish moneylenders first succeeded in having the loans they made the state secure. First succeeded in having the loans they made the state secure by the right to collect the taxes levied upon the people. They used such cruelty when demanding their pound of flesh that it only required the inflammation orator of the priest Fernando Martinez to produce mass action, which ended in one of the bloodiest massacres recorded in history. Here again is a perfect example of how thousands of innocent Jews were victimized for the sins and crimes committed against humanity by just a few. In 1495, Lithuania expelled the Jews. In 1498, Portugal. In 1540, Italy. In 1551, Bavaria. It is important to remember that during the general evictions, certain wealthy and influential Jews managed to obtain sanctuary in Bordeaux, Avignon, certain papal states, Marseille, northern Alsace, and parts of northern Italy. But as stated in the Encyclopedia Britannica, the masses of the Jewish people were thus to be found once more in the East and in the Polish and the Turkish empires. The few communities suffered to remain in Western Europe were meantime subjected at last to the restrictions which earlier ages had usually allowed to remain as ideal. So that, in a sense, the Jewish Dark Ages may be said to begin with the Renaissance. This admission would indicate there is some justification for the claim made by certain historians that not until the Western European nations wrested economic control from the Jewish money lenders did the rebirth of Western civilization occur. Following the great eviction of the Jews again resumed living in ghettos or kahals. Thus, isolated from the masses of the population, the Jews were under the direction and control of the rabbis and elders, many of whom were influenced by the Illuminati and the wealthy Jewish money lenders who remained in their various sanctuaries. In the ghettos, agents of the Illuminati inspired a spirit of hatred and revenge in the hearts of the Jewish people against those who had evicted them. The rabbis reminded them that, as the chosen people of God, the day would come when they would have the revenge and inherit the earth. It should be mentioned that most Jews who settled in Eastern Europe were restricted to living within the Pale of Settlement, located on the western borders of Russia and extending from the shores of the Baltic Sea in the north to the shores of the Black Sea in the south. Most of them were Khazar Jews. Khazar Jews were noted for their Yiddish culture, their rapturous practices in financial matters, and their lack of ethics in commercial transactions. They should not be confused with the biblical Hebrews, who are mild-mannered and, generally speaking, pastoral people. Yeah, that's what I want people to remember. Within the ghettos, in an atmosphere of hatred, the desire for revenge was developed by the agents of Illuminati. They organized these negative conditions into the World Revolution movement based on terrorism. From its very inception, an international-minded money barons and their high priests designed, financed, and controlled the World Revolution movement. They used it as the instruments by which they would obtain their revenge on the Christian churches and the crowned heads of Europe. History proves how the money barons developed the revolutionary movement into international communism as we know it today. They organized individual acts of terrorism into a disciplined revolutionary movement. They then planned systematic infiltration of the Jews back into the countries from which they had been expelled. Because their re-entry was illegal, the only method by which infiltration could be accomplished was to establish Jewish undergrounds. Because the Jews who infiltrated into the undergrounds of the European cities could not obtain lawful employment, they were supplied with funds with which to develop the black market system. They indulged in every kind of illegal traffic and trade, working on the principle of the joint stock company, the identity of the money barons who owned and controlled this vast underground system always remained secret. Count de Poncins, Mrs. Nesta Webster, Sir Walter Scott, and many other authors and historians who have suspected that the Illuminati and the group of internationalists were the secret power behind the world revolutionary movement. I got that Nesta Webster. I didn't know. I thought there was a man. I haven't read the book. I really thought Nesta Webster was a man. I guess it's a woman. I didn't know that. Okay. I got that book, though. The sufficient evidence was pieced together to prove that what they suspected was an actual fact. As the events of history were unrolled in their chronological sequence, it will be seen how the Illuminati used the Semitic groups and the Aryan groups to serve their purpose and involved millions upon millions of people in revolutions and wars to further their own secret and selfish ambition. William Foss and Cecil Gerhati, who wrote The Spanish Arena, said, "The question of who are leading figures behind the attempt of the joint stock company domination of the world and how they obtain their ends is beyond the scope of this book. But it is one of the important libraries affair yet to be written. It will have to be written by a man of highest courage who will count his life as nothing compared with the enlightening the world as to what the satanic self-appointed priesthood would ordain." Wow. How successful the plan to infiltrate back into the countries from which they had been expelled turned out to be can best be, How successful the plan to infiltrate back into the countries from which they had been expelled turned out to be can best be judged by the following records. The Jews were back in England in 1600, back in Hungary in 1500. You know, honestly, Joseph, I don't know. I keep asking myself that too. I do not know. I do not know where we're at in the timeline right now. I really don't. But I do know, I believe it's in Galatians, well, and then throughout it's in Romans and stuff like that, where it speaks about the works of the flesh. So really, we're our own worst enemy as is without Satan influencing us. When you think about it, we really are. We're greedy, we're hateful, we're what? Licentious, we're fornicators, we're adulterers, we're murderers, we're backbiters, we're gossips. All the works of the flesh has nothing to do with Satan. It has to do with our own fleshly nature, really, when you think about it. I mean, I could be wrong, but that's how I see it, at least. So I don't really know. I don't have an answer to that. I just don't. I'm learning things these last few days is blowing my mind away. And I mean, I went and took a nap because I was so distraught over something that I had learned earlier. And it's like, are you serious? Have I been so deceived? Just crazy stuff. So let me get back to reading. Back in Hungary in 1500, they were expelled again in 1582. They were back in Slovakia in 1562, but expelled again in 1744. They were back in Lithuania in 1700, but regardless of how many times they were expelled, there always remained the Jewish underground from which the revolutionary activities of the secret powers were conducted. Because King Edward I of England had been the first to expel the Jews, the Jewish money barons in France, Holland, and Germany decided it would be poetic justice if they tried out their planned revolutionary technique in England first. They used their underground agents, or cells, to cause trouble between the king and his government, employers and labor, ruling class and workers. And then I don't know why that's in there, but it says, oh, so there needs to be a ruling class, church and state. The plotters injected controversial issues into politics and religion to divide the people into two opposing camps. First, they divided the people in England to Catholics and Protestants. Then they divided the Protestants into conformists and nonconformists. When King Charles I was brought into disagreement with his parliament, a Jewish money baron in Holland named Manasseh ben Israel had his agents contact Oliver Cromwell. Now, I've heard that name before. They offered him large sums of money if he would carry out their plan to overthrow the British throne. Manasseh ben Israel and their German and French moneylenders financed Cromwell. Fernandez Carvajal of Portugal often referred to his history as the Great Jew. They don't even know you're home. Became Cromwell's first chief military contractor. He reorganized the Roundheads into a model army. He provided them with the best arms and equipment money could buy. Once the conspiracy was underway, hundreds of trained revolutionaries were smuggled into England and were absorbed into the Jewish underground. The same thing happened in America today. And I'm going to end that there because Richard just got home and the dogs are going to go crazy. So, until later, keep your eyes on Jesus and your nose in the book, which is the Word of God. And let us embed the Word of God upon the tablets of our hearts, so you and I will not sin against God or be deceived. Well, that was over an hour anyway.